Welcome back, nerds. Fino here with a guide for Elisa, the 9-tattooed dragon. She's a 4-star pretender introduced in Halloween Rebellion of 108, and she's the welfare servant of that particular event. Not only is she part of a very rare class, but she's an AoE attacker. Now, Oberon might be the best option for this on paper, but that requires a high NP level and a strong stomach, since he can brick himself if you whiff the damage check. Elisa operates for much lower stakes, so let's see what she's got going on. First up, we have Warcry Mount Liang. This is a 3-turn party attack buff that grants the Mount Liang trait to the party. It technically excludes her for this effect, which is a strange thing to include since she's Mount Liang by default. You get 1 turn of star absorption for Ellie, and then there's another 3-turn effect that changes depending on where your servant falls in the Law Chaos dimension of alignments. Lawful servants get crit damage, neutrals get NP damage, and chaotics get NP gain. Ellie's second skill is Grand Banquet, Mount Liang. Might seem like a strange thing to include, but if you read the water margin, those guys are gobbling down meat and getting wasted daily. Sometimes several times a day, so it checks out. This is a package of 3 effects that apply to Mount Liang allies. Given that Ellie's first skill gives that trait, and these skills all have the same cooldown, your whole party will always get these buffs as long as you sequence them correctly. The first effect is a battery capping out at 20%. The second is a 2k max health buff. The last is actually a drawback that reduces debuff resistance, but as far as drawbacks go, that's small potatoes. Next, we come to Minute Star of Heaven's Raiment. Or maybe it's Minute Star. Whatever. This is a set of personal buffs for Ellie. Quick, buster, and crit damage, all for 3 turns. Pretty straightforward. Ellie's NP is Julong Ellie-chan, Shooting Star. This is an AoE buster attack that reduces defense by a small amount. It overcharges a preemptive, single-turn buff to star absorption and NP damage. Before we get into where Elizabeth falls into the bigger picture, we need to consider what exactly the role of a pretender in this game is. They have full class advantage against alter egos, and they do 1.5 times damage against the 3 knight classes. However, they falter against foreigners and the cavalry classes, the 3 normal ones, not berserkers. So just wail on alter egos, right? Well, that's what single target pretenders like Hephaestion do. She headhunts alter ego bosses first and foremost, but the circumstances work out differently for AoEs. Alter egos typically don't show up en masse, so what you're picking a fight with instead are mixed waves of knight class enemies. Now you might think, just use a berserker, and for farming purposes you'd generally be right, an alter ego boss hiding in an AoE wave aside. But where the idea of an AoE pretender really shines is in mixed class bosses. There was a fairly recent example of this on JP, where they brought back Poseidon's testicle as a super recollection quest. That's a meaty lancer boss accompanied by the archer class Chiron. A berserker could get the job done, but it could just as easily melt from the damage flying around. In this footage I'm using Count Cagliostro, but the fundamental principle is the same. But here we see one of the core weaknesses of pretenders. Much like alter egos, they don't have defensive advantages against their secondary targets, so while they might not be glass cannons like berserkers, they aren't exactly resilient either. One mark against Elizabeth specifically is that, on account of her battery capping out at 20%, she can't effectively loop, so you can't even use her as a generalist farmer. She does have applications though. In the Rebellion of 108 event, the 90++ node has a 1-3-1 arrangement of enemies. The middle wave is really an obstacle for your single target archer, so you need someone to step in and deal with it while also providing buffs and charge to that main attacker. This is where Ellie comes in. This modicum of team building is what keeps Ellie afloat. She's the first welfare servant in this game's history to have a 20% team-wide battery, so if your roster is deficient in terms of having a generic AoE saber, lancer, or archer, she can fill the void as a stopgap. She has the makings of an early to mid-game character, in other words. What sours this assessment is the fact that her event requires Olympus completion. I'd say that anything from Lost Belt 4 onward is solidly in late-game territory. Her damage isn't particularly great either. Her NP only hits about as hard as Cagliostro's, but he has the advantage of being an arts attacker that can spam it out. Meanwhile, Ellie can't even coin loop. So we're talking real stopgap territory here, and you should adjust your expectations accordingly. That said, there are a few tricks and tools you can use to stretch Ellie's effectiveness. For craft essences, you should use first day of filming and aerial drive as your starting point to get that buster, starting charge, NP damage combo. While you won't get too much out of command codes for Ellie-chan, you could use Everyone's Girl Da Vinci to enable your other attacker with a bit of NP damage. Lastly, I'll note that Eliza is chaotic evil for you Doman enthusiasts out there. Doman is a very handy servant for cheesing bronze rarity waves, and his buffs doubling up on Elizabeth can potentially enable a composition where they attack on consecutive turns to clear a path for your true carry to deal with the boss wave. All in all, Elisa the 9-tattooed dragon isn't an exceptional servant, but she's free and she's in a rare class, so I think it'd be foolhardy to turn her down. Definitely do Rebellion of 108 to lock that in. With that said, the conditions to play that event are obnoxiously strict when it feels like Shinjuku would have been plenty, or I guess Solomon since Epic of Remnant chapters are optional. By the time you get her, odds are you'll have access to more specialized attackers in the Saber, Archer, and Lancer classes, meaning her main use is against mixed class boss fights and otherwise fighting alter egos under conditions where they're not often found. It's a real head scratcher. Now let's talk mythology, or fiction to be more exact. Elizabeth Bathory's a story for another day, but that 9 tattoo part refers to a character from the Chinese novel The Water Margin, the same story that Huiyan Zhuo and Yan Qing come from. Specifically, the 9 tattooed dragon is a man by the name of Shi Jin. Now, I have something very embarrassing to admit. I totally forgot about this guy. Didn't realize Ellie was paired with an actual Water Margin character until someone else pointed it out to me. And here's the weird thing, Shi Jin appears really early in the story. He starts off as a bit of a poser. Those 9 dragon tattoos? That's just to look cool. There's no significance to them. One day, his father, a local landowner, takes in a former instructor from the capital as a guest. That guy was driven out by our old nemesis Gao Chu, who held a grudge against his father for giving him a well-deserved whooping in his youth. He sees Shi Jin training and goes, it's pretty flashy, but it won't beat anyone who knows what they're doing. Shi Jin does not take this well, and challenges the man to a battle, which he loses in spectacular fashion. This gets him to change his tune, and Shi Jin begs to be taught by the man. Unlike the showy tricks he had learned in the past, he learns the fundamentals properly this time. Later, Shi Jin's teacher continues on his journey and his father dies, leaving him as the master of the estate. Things are going quietly enough when he gets word that a pack of bandits have set up shop on a nearby mountain. Not Mount Liang, by the way. That comes later. These bandits are, at that moment, worried about having enough provisions to fend off any bounty hunters, so one of their leaders makes the fateful decision to raid a neighboring county, a path that would take them past Shi Jin's estate. This leader, Chen Da, was a bit of a hothead, and when he heard from his comrades that Shi Jin was a badass, he took that as a challenge and went out to see if this guy was all that. The 9 tattooed dragon, for his part, wasn't one to shy away from action. The two of them gathered their cannon fodder and faced off. Chen Da goes, "Hey, if you let me pass, I won't kick your ass." Shi Jin then replies, "Nice try. If you go raiding next door, the feds are going to be coming around to ask me questions too." They go back and forth, but then Shi Jin says, "Hold on a second. It's not just me you have to convince." "Yeah? Who else?" "The sword in my hand." The two charge into combat, and after a lengthy contest, Shi Jin yanks Chen Da off his horse and takes him back to his estate as a prisoner. When Chen Da's routed force returns to the bandit hideout without their leader, his 2 co-chieftains concoct a scheme to free their friend. Get this, they go to Shi Jin without any of their subordinates and fall to their knees in front of him. "We are sworn brothers of Chen Da. All we ask is that you allow us to die together." Moved by this display of loyalty, Shi Jin refuses to take them into custody despite their insistence. What he does instead is he cuts Chen Da's restraints and throws a party for these honorable guests of his. This marks the beginning of a friendly correspondence between Shi Jin and the bandits. They'd send each other gifts, and Shi Jin often tasked one particular servant, a man by the name of Wang Si, to carry out his deliveries. The Mid-Autumn Festival was coming up, and Shi Jin invited his bandit buddies over for a feast. He entrusted the invitation to Wang Si, who dutifully delivered the letter. Once there, he received their reply, an enthusiastic yes, and went back down the mountain after getting his share of whining and dining. Mostly the whining. On the way down, he meets some of his usual drinking buddies and does some more whining. Absolutely trashed by this point, Wang stumbles back towards the estate until he sees a comfortable-looking patch of grass and decides to take a small nap. I tell myself that every night. You know what happens? I wake up 6 hours later, usually. A hunter recognizes Wang and tries to wake him up, but notices some of the party favors in Wang's bag. While helping himself to Wang's cash, he accidentally sees the bandit chieftain's response to Shi Jin. Remember that these bandits had a price on their head? The hunter did. When Wang finally wakes up, he realizes he's been robbed in his sleep. Does he tell Shi Jin that there's a huge security breach? No. He says, "Yeah, sorry I'm late. You know how those bandits are with their hospitality." They were going to write a reply, but I told them, I'll tell them verbally. No need for a paper trail. The day of the festival, everyone is gathered in Shi Jin's mansion when he hears a racket outside. Peering over the walls of his compound, he sees a militia armed to the teeth. The bandits offer to turn themselves in to spare Shi Jin any trouble, but he's like, "Fuck that. Then it'll look like I tricked you into coming here so I could cash in your reward. The manly badasses across the world wouldn't take me seriously if I did that." So he peeks back over the wall and plays dumb. What's all the ruckus for? The militia then produces the hunter, who reveals the letter and how he got it off a wasted Wang. Shi Jin gives said Wang the filthiest side-eye, and then shouts, "Okay, stay right there. I'll bring the bandits out, then let's go get that reward." Heading back toward the mansion, he motions Wang to come over. "Hey buddy, I forgive you, but my sword don't," and shivs him on the spot. Shi Jin gathers his servants, telling them to pack up whatever they could move. He then sets a series of fires. First, some small huts in the back. The militia sees this and rushes to that side of the compound, but then he sets his mansion alight. With the situation now thoroughly chaotic, Shijin bursts out through the main gate with the bandits and his servants, plowing through the leftover militiamen still guarding that route. Spotting the hunter amongst the disordered rabble, Shijin's blood boils, and he runs the rat down, cutting him in half as he rides past. With the breakout successful, the gang takes refuge in the bandit stronghold. While they offer to let Shijin hide out for a while and even rebuild his compound once the heat dies down, he resolves to seek out his arms instructor and make a new life for himself. This doesn't go quite to plan, but he does get to team up with Lu Jishen, who's probably my favorite character in the water margin. The rest of Shijin's story isn't quite so interesting. He comes back to the bandits and joins them, gets captured, gets bailed out by the Maoliang bandits and joins them, gets captured again, and lives long enough to get amnesty from the emperor. Ah, but things wouldn't end so neatly for the nine-tattooed dragon. The ex-bandits are tasked with putting down a rebellion by a man named Fang La. Unlike their other enemies, Fang La has assembled a force of extraordinary fighters every bit as clever and ferocious as the Liangshan bandits. And when the two meet, it turns into an absolute bloodbath. The 108, pretty much invincible before this point, get cut down in droves, and by the time Fang La is taken into custody, fully half of them have died. During this campaign, Shijin is part of a task force to take a critical pass. This pits him against Pang Wanchun, one of Fang La's most dangerous heroes. He's an archer by trade, and this would become a very big problem shortly. The task force finds the low ground of the pass entirely empty, and that's when Pang Wanchun reveals himself from the hills. "You should have stayed in the swamps. Now you die." He lets loose an arrow and Shijin is the first to go down. His comrades try to pull him to safety, but then a gong sounds in the distance, and Pang Wanchun's army emerges, bombarding the task force with an onslaught of arrows, crossbow bolts, and really just anything they had on hand. In this rain of iron, they would perish. Shijin, two of the bandits he befriended, and even his old teacher, the one that taught him the flashy but crap moves, not the good one. No epic battle, no heroic last stand, dead, just like that. They lost the coin flip. My boy was playing Yu-Gi-Oh the whole time. But even though Shijin could not be saved, he could be avenged. This time the ex-bandits systematically set fire to the trees lining the hills to flush out any ambushes. They also took advantage of a little-known side road to get around the pass and set a fire behind the defenders. With nowhere to run, Pang Wanchun's army fell into chaos. He manages to break out through the rear, but he would leave alone. The ex-bandits would set upon his men and officers like vengeful demons, cutting out their hearts as offerings to the fallen. Pang Wanchun would live to inflict another defeat on the Imperial forces, but this time he'd push his luck too far. He decides to follow up with a night attack on their camp, but he finds it deserted. With fires and shouts of war rising up around him, he realizes it's a trap. He rushes out of the camp, and after a near miss with Hu Yanzhuo mauling the guy next to him, he makes a break for it, but soon enough his horse goes out from under him. He's captured by a man named Tong Long, the gold coin-spotted leopard, and he'd be taken back to the Imperial camp. They have unfinished business after all. Minus one heart and Shijin would be avenged. With his defenses shattered, his master Fang La wouldn't be long for this world either. Thanks for watching. Like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more, and come watch me on twitch.tv/RenoTyson where I stream every week, Wednesday and then Friday through Sunday at 3 PM Pacific time. This week I'm playing Golden Sun 2 on Wednesday, Castlevania Portrait of Ruin on Friday, a Pokemon Showdown tournament on Saturday, and if I'm unlucky enough, more Hu Yanzhuo rolls on Sunday. See you there.